Dealing with North Korea human rights is not an easy issue. The United States adopted in 2004 a piece of legislation called the North Korea Human Rights Act, in which Congress called for certain steps by the administration to make progress on North Korea human rights. I was on the staff of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the time. I was the Democratic Staff Director, was involved very much in negotiating out the final text that was agreed to for the adoption of this legislation. If I had known then that I was going to be the special envoy for North Korea human rights, which the law created the position that I hold, I probably would have written a few other things in there about what the position ought to do. But it's an interesting experience to be able to deal with these kinds of issues. Human rights are not usually on the front burner of what we're doing in our government activities. And it's been important to have the North Korea Human Rights Act to encourage the government to move in a positive direction, and I'm happy to say that the State Department has moved in a very positive way in terms of dealing with human rights. What do we do in terms of trying to promote human rights? Number one, probably the most important, is to name and shame. You want to call out the human rights violations that are going on in North Korea. You want to call attention to them. You want to point out what's going on in North Korea. And by doing that, you want to shame the North Koreans into making changes and making improvements. We issue reports on human rights conditions. North Korea consistently comes up as one of the worst human rights abusers in the reports that we issue every year. There's a report on trafficking in persons, forced labor, sexual exploitation. North Korea consistently comes up as a country of concern in terms of trafficking. There's a religious freedom report that's issued by the United States government, by the State Department every year, where North Korea is identified as a country of particular concern because of the lack of freedom of religion in North Korea. So we continue to call attention to these problems. We continue to press the North Koreans to make progress in this regard. Second thing that we do is we work through United Nations agencies to encourage attention on North Korea. The United Nations has an organization called the Human Rights Council, meets in Geneva. They focus on human rights issues around the world. And what we've been able to do is focus on North Korea. We've adopted a resolution critical of North Korea's human rights record every year for the last, where are we now, 12, 13 years. And every year, this resolution has been adopted by an overwhelming majority of the countries that are members of the Human Rights Council, calling out the abuses that are recognized. We've created what's called a special rapporteur, that's a French word, which means a special reporter, that prepares a report that he gives to the Human Rights Council every year, talking about what the problems and difficulties are in North Korea. We've been able to do the same thing in the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York. The General Assembly, this body of all of the members of the United Nations, all 185 or something like that, they've adopted a resolution every year for the last 12 years calling on North Korea to improve its human rights record. We've even been successful in raising the human rights issue in the United Nations Security Council. The Security Council is this group of 15 countries. These 15 countries, 5 of them are permanent members: the United States, Britain, France, China, and Russia, as well as 10 other members who were selected by the UN to serve for a 2-year term. This organization has taken up the human rights issue and done it for the last 2 years, and we're hoping to do it again this year. But this has caused attention to be focused on North Korea. The thing that's been interesting is as we have continually raised North Korean human rights issues in the General Assembly and in the Human Rights Council, there aren't many countries that are willing to vote against these resolutions and support the DPRK. North Korea does not have a lot of support among other countries, and most countries don't defend North Korea's human rights record. They only say, we don't think a single country should be identified and pointed out for its human rights record. And most of the countries who make that argument are the ones who have serious human rights record problems on their own. Belarus, Cuba, Venezuela, Zimbabwe. The human rights violators are the only support that North Korea seems to be able to find. The rest of the members of the UN tend to be very supportive of these resolutions. So those are two of the things that we try to do. A third thing that we try to do is to assist refugees who leave North Korea and who try to get away from the brutality and the problems that they've faced there. It's not easy, as you know, and the refugees who have made that trip know how difficult and how painful, how long, how precarious a trip that is. We try to be helpful. We try to help them. We raise the issue of the refugees that want to leave, the defectors who want to leave North Korea. We try to provide assistance to them. Those who want to come to the United States are able to come here. Most of them choose to go to South Korea. But we work very closely with South Korea in dealing with refugees and helping them and trying to help provide opportunities for them when they get here to the United States as well. Another issue and concern that we have in terms of North Korea human rights is the right of freedom of speech, which they don't have. And in North Korea, you don't have access to other voices than the voice, other than the voice of the official North Korean government. And as a result, people don't know a lot about what's going on in the outside world. One of the things we've tried to do is to increase information going into North Korea. The United States provides radio broadcasts. I mean, radio, most people don't even listen to radio anymore these days. In North Korea, radio is the only way to find out what's going on in the outside world. Radio Free Asia, Voice of America broadcast 9-10 hours a day into North Korea. The hours, the prime time hours for broadcasting to North Korea, 9 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, because that's when you can listen to the radio without having someone know what you're doing. It's illegal to have a radio that can be tuned. The only radio that you can have is a radio, legally, is a radio that is preset to the official government channel. Same thing with television. If you're caught, you can be sent to re-education camp and in some cases more serious punishment. In spite of that fact, we estimate, based on surveys with defectors who've left North Korea, with people who are temporarily outside of North Korea, up to 1/3 of North Koreans listen to foreign radio broadcasts. Some broadcast by the United States, some broadcast by South Korea, and some broadcast in Korean from China, not directed at North Korea, but directed at the Korean population in China. So it's an important part of what we do to try to encourage more openness in terms of information, so North Koreans know what's going on in their own country. One of the other things that we try to do, one of the last things we try to do, is to help the North Koreans who are facing difficulties and problems inside North Korea. It's a difficult place. Food is difficult to find. There have been famines that have been fairly serious. Things don't seem to be as bad in the last few years. But one of the things we've tried to do is to encourage organizations in the United States in particular, but elsewhere as well, who provide humanitarian assistance to North Korea. Those who provide medical assistance, medicines, medical equipment, those who provide technical assistance in improving the ability to raise crops, those that provide other kinds of educational assistance to North Korea. So all of these things are things that we do to try to break down the barriers with North Korea and to push North Korea in a more positive direction as far as dealing with the human rights situation of its own people. It's not an easy fight. It's not going fast, but we are making progress, and we're going to continue doing that. One of the most important things that needs to be done in terms of encouraging human rights in North Korea is for people like you to talk to your congressmen, your senators, to people you deal with every day, and to other people in your communities to raise the importance of the human rights situation in North Korea. So don't think that because you're not out on the front line in terms of trying to radio broadcast into North Korea, that you're not doing anything. You're doing what's very important, and that's keeping the issue alive and important. Keep up the good work. Thank you for what you're doing.